Okay, so, I'm very loud right now, or I think so. I can hear me. I love the sound of my own voice. That's a joke, but not this loud. It's more like the sound, voice of God or something. That I'm not. Good. So, this one. Let's see. Everybody ready? Yeah, good. Me too. Final lecture of EML. I mean, time flies when you're having fun. Definitely holds for me. It's echoing. It's too loud. Stupid. One of my dear colleagues exchanged microphone 1 with microphone 3, and as a result, I didn't hear anything with microphone 1, and I'll be touching this thing for much longer than I would like to. But, okay, yeah, lecture 14, final lecture. Also for me, this means that the last time I'll be lecturing EML for the foreseeable future. So it's a very emotional moment for me. I'll try to fight back the tears, right? And on the upside, that means I will have my hands free to teach other lectures, and I will definitely do so. So perhaps it's even to your benefit, right? Unless you're like a hell no, right? I mean, never ever a Freke lecture. I mean, fine by me, fine by me. But otherwise, we might meet again. Good. Before I get properly started, some other pointers, because now that we're at the final lecture, this means that we're getting closer and closer to the exam. And for some reason, students tend to be interested in exams. And as lecturers, I mean, we're much less interested in them because they're a lot of work, really a lot of work, right? But yeah, students want them, so there we go. The main exam, or the first exam moment, because there's not really a main and re-exam for EML. There's just 2 examination moments, and if you want to take the one or the other or both, all is fine by me, as long as you're eligible to take an exam, if you scored enough points, right? I mean, this is primarily to protect, well, you from yourself, in the sense that if you didn't make enough points during the assignments, then the chances you will actually make it in the exam are not that great. And the other way around, definitely so. So it's sort of like a keeping up to date type of thing, and not just torture. Because again, assignments and grading is a lot of work on our side, right? We would much rather say, okay, just welcome to the exam. That would get a bloody mess. Good. Main exam, first exam, is going to be on February 23rd, right? It's already announced on the webpage, and a long time ago. Nothing changed there. We most likely will be using 3 lecture halls for this, because there's not so many of you right now, but for the exam, all of a sudden, this room will be much more populated, and either you get too close to each other, and that we don't like, right? I mean, exams are sort of private business. So we'll be using 3 different lecture halls. But how many we need exactly, for that we need to know how many of you want to take the exam. For that, we need to have a registration in place. We will announce, be it tomorrow, be it on Monday, but AKA soon, by an email, we open the registration procedure on CMS. CMS being really the course website, right? And it is really important that if you want to take the exam and you're eligible, you register there. We set up the system such that you can only register if you're eligible, right? So that there's no oopsie there, right? That is for us, in a way, the most important measure for, okay, who's going to be taking the exam. Now, for most of you, and while I walk to close the door, either the door was open or she was laughing really loud. But for those of you, most of you, who are in a study program that is sort of LSF enabled, so the university registration system, in order for us to enter your grade into LSF, you also need to register in LSF, right? For some of you, you can't register in LSF, either because you're in an Erasmus program, you're in, well, a new, between very big quotes, study program. This might include Mint Plus. I don't know for certain, right? But basically, try to register in LSF. If you can't, definitely make sure you register in CMS, because that is our let's say, our holy guide for organizing everything. That will be announced and will be opened tomorrow, respectively Monday, right? So far, so good. What will be covered in the exam? Everything. Everything we've covered in the lectures, unless I specifically said, okay, this is not going to be part of the exam, right? I'm a man of my word, so then it's not going to be part of the exam. What is part, in that sense? The slides, what was said in addition, right? In that, so if we elaborate a bit on the slides, so just looking at the slides might not prepare you well enough for the exam. The assignments, we assume that you've done and you understand the assignments. That's why we have the tutorials, right, to walk you through it. That's why we give out the solutions and so on and so forth, right? So also part of it. And of course, the relevant chapters of the book. All those three things combined, right? That's, in addition, there is one let's say, one source outside of the book. That was when we were just lecturing about Disney, right? About this low-dimensional embedding, right? And that's it's not covered in the book for some stupid reason, primarily because it's too new. That you also need to understand well enough, right? That's effectively what I expect you to know and well, to be able to answer questions on. We already made available the exams from previous years, so you have a pretty good feeling of how this year's exam or how it will look like, right? I mean, the exact words will differ, right? And that's and hence also the words that you have to write down, but the general gist of it, the difficulty, and so on and so forth, that will align very much. Current plan is that for the upcoming tutorial, the tutors will cover an example exam or a number of questions from those exams to walk you through it, right? I mean, that's another gesture towards getting you in one piece through the exam, well, as well prepared as possible. Let's see. We are planning to grade the exam approximately, well, we'll probably need a week and a half. We would ideally do it even faster, but many of my TAs are actually traveling because they have research papers published. They need to go to Vancouver, poor them. But yeah, because they're there, we simply don't have the people to grade on time. And yeah, so approximately a week and a half, I guess, right, until after the exam, then the grades will be out. We will then also announce, I mean, we will release very soon after the exam has been done, both the exam PDF, the questions, and the sample solution, right? So you do not have your own written answers anymore, right? I mean, those you have to add in. Sorry for that, but otherwise we can't grade them. But you can already sort of see, like, was I going in the right direction, right? So another gesture towards you. Then once the grades are out, we plan to grade everything per question, right? So there's going to be 5 main problems, number of sub-questions, each which get a number of points per sub-question, and we plan to issue those points that you gathered accordingly, right? So you already have a bit of like, hey, wait a second, I didn't even attempt this, I didn't get points. Okay, no surprise. And wait a second, I should have gotten more points, I feel. We plan to have, I don't know the exact date yet. I mean, it's a bit of a planning, scheduling hell on our side, but I think roughly a week and a half again after we release the grades, there's going to be the exam inspection, where it's going to be in person. You'll have to sign up for it, such that we can create some cohorts that we don't have like one giant heap of students in one very long queue. That's not COVID compliant, of course. And then you can actually inspect what you wrote versus the sample solution, give comments on what you think, where we might have made errors in the grading. We take all of those comments into account. Afterwards, we process them, we update the grades where applicable, and there we are. That's the procedure. And we make sure that this inspection and this updating of the grades is, of course, done on time, well on time, ideally, before the registration deadline for the second exam, right? So in case that you didn't make the first exam, right? I mean, you failed it, let's hope not, but suppose they did, that you can register on time, you don't have to register blindly. What is also very important on the topic of registering, and I hope that all of you know this, but the moment you register on LSF, you have until 1 week before the actual exam to deregister. If you decide, okay, I don't want to take the exam, I just don't feel it anymore, right? And that's, if you do not deregister on time, there's nothing that I can do, literally nothing. So you're registered, if you don't show up, okay, that's going to be a fail. Too bad, right? I mean, that's, university regulations prohibit me from doing anything. I literally have no power there. So make sure that if you know you don't want to take the exam, that you deregister. One kind request, suppose that you signed up for the exam, you can't deregister on LSF anymore, too bad, right? But you know that you don't want to show up anymore. I would appreciate it if you could just shoot us an email, because that helps us in the planning, right? I can't do anything on the fail, but it does allow us that, for example, you are the one why we have one student more than we can fit in the 2 rooms. You're the person why we need the 3rd room. Maybe we can shuffle some things, right? So If you know that you're not going to show up, help us with that. That's my only request. Okay, so that is the rundown for the exam. Are there any questions regarding the exam? Anything unclear, anything you would like to know? Or is this sufficiently, well, easy peasy? Also no questions on Zoom, so I presume that this is clear. Good, okay, well then we can get properly started, can't we? Machine learning and the real world. I was very tempted to not so much skip this lecture, but to rehaul it completely, because what I'm going to be lecturing in this part is perhaps even further away, in a certain sense, of my own research, as the rest of EML is, and that's already quite far away from my research, because I mostly do unsupervised stuff and whatnot. We're going to be talking about, well, the impact that machine learning can have on the real world and the things that you have to take into consideration when you try to deploy a machine learning system in the real world. That is, so far, we've mostly been thinking about, well, methods, algorithms, a bit of theory, right? How can we learn stuff? But we've been living in a sandbox, right? A very small, simple, safe sandbox, right? Where all the sharp edges have been brushed over. Very simple metrics we've been using, misclassification rate, reconstruction, right? And basically we've been saying higher accuracy, higher, lower mean squared error is better, right? I mean, that's better, which made sense, right? I mean, in our sandbox, this made a lot of sense. However, if you are just blindly optimizing just those metrics and you put systems like that into action, you're not in for a good time. You're not in for a good time at all. Machine learning recently, and if you ask me, I'm a bit of a conservative person there, perhaps a bit too early, has hit the main stage and is used in all sorts of critical applications. Everybody's enthusiastic about ML and AI, and they want to use it in medical stuff and to decide where people should get a loan or not. Or there was a huge scandal 2-3 years ago where the Dutch tax office, they used some automated rule to decide who should be specifically audited and who not. And yeah, well, let's say the system worked in a way, but not in a way that anybody would like it to work. Perhaps I shed a bit more light on that later. But the moment that the algorithmic decision-making involves humans, is that door open there as well or not? Yeah, okay, then I'm going to also close that door. The moment that a machine learning algorithm is used to make decisions about humans, then we're not just talking about, well, one small misclassification error, right? One oopsie, but we're talking about potentially ruining somebody's life, right? Potentially killing them, which, well, has pretty high impact, right? I mean, that's like if you, due to some automated error, except in the tax situation, I mean, get audited and said, okay, you need to pay back 30,000, 60,000, 100,000 euros, and you have to do this by tomorrow, otherwise, I mean, the fine will be double that amount and whatnot. Okay, you can go to court, but if it then takes 3 years before you finally are told, yeah, you were right, oopsie, right? I mean, algorithm should not have done that. Meanwhile, where did you get this money from, right? I mean, that you have a huge debt. So all of a sudden, I mean, well, you're not eligible to buy a house anymore, and so on and so forth. You can't pay for food or for kids or whatever, right? I mean, that's huge impact on your life because one stupid error in an algorithm. Can't have that. So we have to consider societal impacts, impact on humans. Another thing that people tend to forget, or tended to forget, there's now some awareness, that the moment you start to implement a machine learning model into the real world, you create very weird feedback loops. One example there, out of many, is that suppose that you now, this is a real example, I mean, that Amazon, I mean, we all know, they get a lot of applicants, right? I mean, that big company gets a lot of applicants, even though they pay quite shittily, as I know from some colleagues, but okay, lots of people want to work there. And they were like, oh my God, this is so much work screening these things. Why don't we use machine learning? Why don't we use AI? Just to decide which applications should we look at and which ones shouldn't we look at. Well, sounds like a good idea, right? You can reduce the workload because many applications are going to be, okay, we don't even need to look at those. We can focus on those that we really should look at. How would we train such a system? If you do this naively, you just say, okay, well, these are the people we hired, and these are, well, the people that we screened and did not hire. Let's just make a decision there. sounds good, maybe. What could possibly go wrong? Exactly. There might have been some prejudices, right? I mean, in the hiring process, I mean, conscious or subconscious, right? And that's what effectively happened in the Amazon case is that they had a system that essentially said, okay, you come from India, you're hired. India and you're male and you're hired. And that's those were the two main things. I mean, that yeah, you smart. Okay, I'm going to now jump to a conclusion. You look like you're not from India. Maybe you are, maybe you're not, right? But so yeah, no, you're not accepted. Yeah, well, it's a bit of a pity, right, for quite a few in the world. But it is a pretty good classifier if you want to separate out of the massive amounts of engineers that Amazon indeed has, right? And that, and it has large offices also in Bangalore and whatnot, right? I mean, in India, so it makes some sense. Okay, well, you know what? Let's remove that, right? Let's remove nationality. Let's train a new classifier. Same thing happens, because there's lots of markers like where is somebody born, or to which school did you go, right? Which university did you go? I went to IIT. Well, IIT means India, right? And that's so I didn't include nationality, but just university. University is perhaps kind of useful as a marker, right? So making the system stop, well, essentially being racist, either the one way or the other way, right? I mean, complete misogynist. I mean, if you're a woman, you're not going to be hired, because the vast majority of engineers hired by Amazon in the past were indeed men. So why hire a woman to begin with, right? Stop system. Essentially, they kind of at one moment, after a few years, this project's okay, well, yeah, fuck it, we're going to do it by hand again. They invested millions in this project. True story. I mean, that's, I don't have the slides to show the news articles on this, but you can look it up. But, so you get very weird feedback loops. Specifically, if now on the new data, where we have already been using a machine learning algorithm, if we now, well, train further models. Because maybe the biases in the model were not so super obvious, right? That's maybe secretly the algorithm really liked professors from the Netherlands, right? I mean, that's maybe. There's not so many of us, right? So we might have sort of snuck in this bias, right? I mean, that's, but if we run this now for long enough, then at one moment you're just going to have a super bias towards super Dutchies. I mean, that's which I think is warranted, of course, right? But maybe it's not. Maybe it's not. So this was a subtle bias that is not so clear in the immediate analysis, right? So you have to be very careful. Oh, oops, indeed, very careful. Bottom line is we should always ask, are we optimizing for the right thing? Just accuracy, plain accuracy, is going to give you a bad time in many, many real-world applications. Or accuracy alone is not enough. There's a number of other things you need to keep in mind, right? Beyond the example that I already just gave. Privacy, not unimportant. If you train a machine learning model on, let's say, medical data, or some data that has some private information, right? The training data, right? And that, you probably do not want that the model that has learned something, that if you poke it with a stick in the right way, that it spits out private information from the training data. Not ideal, right? Especially in medical applications. How can we prevent machine learning model from doing that? Now we have to think a little bit beyond the relatively simple linear regression type of models that we've been seeing for a long time, right? But neural networks specifically, but also kernel machines, because they're very powerful. Essentially, any powerful machine learning technique can, well, memorize or reconstruct things that, yeah, well, you might not want to be able to reconstruct. Fairness. Already discussed it, right? I mean, that you don't want to disadvantage particular individuals or particular minorities. I mean, that's marginalized groups. Security, also not unimportant, because now you've trained your super duper, I don't know, cancer recognition model or whatnot, right? You invested millions in gathering data, cleaning data, training the model, and so on and so forth, right? And that's maybe you want to now, as a company, deploy this. It would be kind of annoying if somebody now comes along, queries your system just a few times, and can actually, in no time, for almost no cost, create a machine learning model that is epsilon close, that gets 99.9% of the decisions exactly the same as your super expensive model, right, for just a fraction of the cost. It's called model stealing. Turns out to be super easy, like ridiculously easy. You can easily fool a machine learning system. We've already seen in for the linear regression that we had this what's the name again? High leverage points, for example, right? I mean, data points that can actually affect the model disproportionately, right? That's actually more of an example for poisoning the training data. Suppose that we have a large data set, but we now inject just a few points, right? Maybe one even, and we can tilt the model, we can influence the model in a disproportionate way. If we have full control over the training data, we know this is absolutely not happening, okay, fine, right? But even linear regression is foolable. So, it is that way also possible to build in like complete backdoors. Essentially, you have let's say a visual recognition system, right? I mean, only allow in my own employees that it's been trained on, right? I mean, but if the system is trained in such a way that just show it like a small smiley face button or something, that person is led through, that's not really what you want, right? And your entire factory, whatever, is not secure anymore. Turns out to be super easy to create this in machine learning labs, because it just wants to exploit patterns. Give it the right patterns and it will exploit it. Related to that, you need to be able, hence, before you can properly trust the system and before you can hence deploy it in the real world, you need to be able to explain the model. You need to explain what is the system doing. When is it doing what? Under which conditions can we trust it? Under which conditions cannot we trust it? And with it, I mean a decision that the system makes. Why and how this is made? I mean, for linear regression, reasonably easy, right? Model is understandable and you can see, okay, well, logistic regression, reasonably easy. The neural networks we discussed last week, you can already see that this becomes quite a problem, right? If you learn a very complicated set of basis functions, what's the network doing, right? Yeah, it gives the right answer in 99% of the times. But otherwise, we don't really know, right? I mean, is it picking up on the right features or the wrong features? It's a bit of an old example in a way, but let me actually ask, how many of you have heard of the notion AI winter? One person, okay, good. So AI winters, I mean, we've had a few now, at least two, and I mean, the third one is perhaps upon us, who knows? It's basically the moment right after a big hype towards learning systems, machine learning, AI, whatever, right? And because of the big hype, lots of money and lots of research effort were poured into studying AI. And then you have this moment where you're like, wait a second, it's not magic after all. It can only do this or only do that. And all of a sudden, money dried up. And well, going from, let's say, king of the hill in AI land, you're like sort of a beggar and you have to find a nice bridge to live under. This happened a number of times. First time was in the late 60s, early 70s, on top of my head, don't have the exact years. Both have to do with neural networks. The first one was when the perceptron was invented. Perceptron is essentially a one-layer neural network. And people were playing with this, and with relatively limited data, it could learn all sorts of cool functions and decisions. Everyone like, wow, right? I mean, in a few years, we're going to have human-level intelligence, right? And just combine a few perceptrons and whatnot. It's going to be amazing. Until people realize, wait a second, it can only learn linearly separable problems. Give it a nonlinear problem, and we're dead. And nobody had an inkling of an idea how you can train not just a neural network, but any machine learning model beyond linearity. So all the money was gone. Specifically the money, that's because lots of the machine learning research traditionally has been funded by DARPA, which is the American research agency for military research or research with a military, let's say, use case. So all of a sudden it was dead, AI winter. Then it took a while until, well, approximately 1986, backprop all of a sudden hit the scene. We can train neural networks and universal function approximators. Oh my God, right? We're going to have human-level intelligence in 10 years. No biggie. That's, until people realized, when they trained the neural networks, that they then could train. We didn't have the GPU time and the data sets that we have now, right? That, well, the system did not really do what they were intended to do. There was one big challenge, so DARPA issues these challenges, right, which are really above what we can currently do. And if you win this challenge, you get, I don't know, $1 million, whatever, a large sum of money, right? I mean, I don't know the exact amounts anymore. One of the challenges they put out is build a tank recognizer. Image of a tank, right? Satellite image or like some observation image of a tank. Is this a Russian tank or is this a US tank or a NATO tank? you can see where the application goes, right? I mean, that's so that's societally beneficial. And there was a system that won this, so people got their million or whatever it was, and it had like an insanely high accuracy, right? I mean, let's say 99%. Doesn't really matter. It's besides the point. And so DARPA was happy, right? We're going to get a super good system. And well, in practice, it didn't work at all. Why not? Well, the system didn't learn to recognize Russian, respectively, NATO tanks. It learned that, well, if the photo is taken under nice weather conditions, then it's a NATO tank. A pretty sharp picture. And if it's like under shitty conditions, okay, that's a Russian tank. So it's like a very bad weather recognizer. Yeah, okay, well, you could say, okay, people didn't look well enough at the training data. They didn't. But explainability, right? Being able to say, okay, well, model, almighty model, what have you learned? Why are you making this decision? Kind of difficult, right? Kind of difficult. Under the right set of basis functions, you get explainability for free. Otherwise, you're screwed. One other thing that is very much understudied, so it gets way too little research attention, or at least has so far, is the notion of uncertainty. When should you and when shouldn't you trust your machine learning model? You could say, okay, well, let's look at the probabilities, and then under the logit, right? I mean, that's if there's a huge gap, we should totally trust it. Maybe, maybe not, right? Neural networks tend to memorize instances. So they're going to be super confident on this one instance. Anything close to it, but you shouldn't trust them. How do you properly quantify how trustworthy the system is, right? And that's, can you put your life in its hands, or like, okay, well, perhaps not, right? I mean, that's perhaps build an ensemble and perhaps that works better. Accountability is another one. Ideally, if you have some system that is self-learning or has been learned, let's say in a self-driving car, right? And that you want to be able to externally, after the fact, audit what happened, why, what, how. Just basically as the police goes, right, after a crime has been reported and they investigate, right, and you have, okay, sort of an investigation, a proper investigation. Is the system functioning as intended, or was it functioning as intended? Kind of important. How do you do this in practice? All of those are very important. You have others that I'm not going to list right now. I mean, carbon footprint. So learning like your super mega ultra deep neural network, right? And that if for that you need weeks and weeks of compute that correspond to many cars, let's say the prediction and lifetime usage of many internal combustion engine cars, right? And you need to do this time and time again, like every day. I mean, okay, what are you actually doing, right? And that's far beyond just accuracy. This is more the applications of machine learning. And what are you now going to do with these models? And as machine learners, in the recent years, I mean, the awareness only very recently this grew, and that's a bit scary. Like, well, perhaps we should be careful with what we research, and perhaps we should think about what are the implications of our research. Just to give a real example, as professor, researcher, how the system works is that we do research, right? I mean, me, my PhD students, then at one moment you have found something, right? Like, oh my God, the world should know it. You write this up in an article, you submit this to a conference, to a journal paper, and then people review this. And if you convince these people that, yes, you discovered something worth of knowing, right? It gets accepted, and then you get to present it at the conference, respectively get published at the journal, and nobody cares. So conferences are more fun. So you get to travel at least. So I review also other people's work, right? I mean, it's not just that we do research, we also have to pay our dues, of course. And this was a paper, I think it was 3 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, really been super recent in that sense, where a group of researchers, and I'm not going to name where they're from or whatnot, I mean, let's not shame them too much, but they were presenting a visual system, like a computer vision-based system, that based on a picture, could determine with even higher accuracy than the state of the art, the sexual orientation of that person. I'm not going to ask for a raise of hands of who thinks this is a good idea, right? Because I don't want to shame anybody, but I hope that everybody would sort of, no, right? I mean, no. This is one of those things, yes, you could try to do that, but why on earth would you? Because this is clearly you shouldn't, right? And that's also, I mean, why do you even think this would generalize, right? I mean, why? right? And that's just like, okay, these people didn't even think before they started doing, right? And that's lots of other examples here. Of well, the final one, bad side of optimizing click-through. I think this is perhaps the biggest challenge that we have in our day and age, and that's all these social media websites, right? Or actually basically every website, all the clickbait articles, right? I mean, these are generated to make people click. Oh my God, right? I mean, that doctors hate this simple trick or whatever it is, right? I mean, that's all this hypey type of short attention. It works, right? We just descended from the trees, right? We're very stupid animals, right? Oh my God, what makes these doctors so upset? We click. Same thing with crazy news reports, right? About our favorite or our least favorite political candidate. Oh my God, oh my, you share it and whatnot, right? And optimizing just for click-through leads to very bad effects at a societal level. Right? Nobody thinks for themselves anymore. That's obviously an exaggeration, but this definitely did not help. If you now couple this with text generation, like in GPT, and with image generation, like in DALL-E 2 and the likes, right? And then you have like a fake news bomb that, how on earth are we going to survive this? We will, I think, we will, but somebody needs to think very hard. So all of this, I hope, sounds important, right? Like, yeah, we should keep this in mind, but also very vague. How do we measure privacy? How do we measure fairness? How do we measure any of these things, right? I mean, that's let's say societal acceptance. Also, mind you, I didn't even point this out. I mean, we have a very international group of people here, right? And that's and what is acceptable, what is okay or not for you is A, a very personal decision, and B, also very culturally biased, right? So I'm from the Netherlands, like I already said a number of times today. We have a different set of values than here in Germany. It's not vastly different, but it is different, right? And that's we're a bit more risk-prone. And that's Germans like to follow rules a bit more. You saw this during COVID. I mean, that's crazy from my perspective. Like, look at all these people are following the rules. I mean, anyway, that's and the opposite. I also looked in the news in the Netherlands, like, oh my God, people follow more rules, because I have become a little bit German in the last 10 years. So, formalizing these problems, trying to pin them down, that we can actually measure these types of effects, is half of the challenge, perhaps even more, right? Because what you can't measure, you can't know, you can't fix, right? And then it just remains a feeling, and feelings are great, but not in science. So, in the last 5 years, most of the topics started to get attention, maybe 6 years, I mean, something like this, right? I mean, there have always been some oddball scientists that have been pointing in these directions, but let's say serious mainstage attention is very recent. What is very important, and especially for all of you, because you are primarily computer scientists, sorry if I insult now any of the bioinformaticians or whatnot, right? I mean, that's, but we are geeks, we are nerds, right? I mean, that's why we're here. And as my fellow geeks, I mean, we like technological solutions, right? Let there be a problem, okay, let's figure out the solution, right? Let's build a machine, an algorithm, or something like this, right? And this is how we see the world, or how many of us see the world. And for each of the problems that I just sketched, technology can at best be part of the solution. In fact, very often it is a very big part of the problem. And yeah, just building a fairness. I mean, how can we quantify? We'll see, right? I mean, if I get to it time-wise, we have to see how far I get. But how can we quantify it? And we'll see that this is very difficult. And then only for certain cases we can build something. But for this we can build it, but that can't do that. And in the end, these are very human values, and hence there needs to be a human in the loop. We as a society need to decide what do we want, what don't we want, and then, well, maximize for that. So hence interdisciplinary effort, right? We have to work with people, right? Just geek people is not enough, right? But, is this for me a reason to not be completely in love with this research topic, right? And why do I other things? I mean, I'm not going to comment, right? I'm not going to. We have worked a bit on both topics. I mean, I'm not afraid of people so much. I'm going to discuss with you privacy, respectively fairness. I have many more slides than I can cover, so I have to see what I cover in what depth, right? I mean, hopefully you're not all too upset. But, if I skip certain details. And if you want to know more, there's plenty of courses on offer at UDS on these topics, because we are, let's say, remarkably well positioned in the international landscape on these topics. Let's start with privacy. Anonymization. Anonymization is very, very hard, to the point of it's almost impossible. I brought a few examples. So study, Sweeney, 2013. So this is the awareness, right? So I was talking about the 5-6 years that people started to really work on solutions, right? I mean, this is more, there was some awareness by certain groups of researchers a bit earlier. So US government released a data set of medical visits to allow researchers to study these things and draw interesting conclusions or whatnot, right? I mean, completely benign in its intentions. That they did, of course, want to protect the identities of the innocent. So they removed the names, the addresses, social security numbers, right? Anything that could pin you down immediately. Okay, sounds good, right? I mean, that's just the data on zip codes, birth date, and gender is left. What could possibly go wrong? What percentage of people do you think could be re-identified? 90%. For every 3, yes, exactly. It depends very much on the density of the zip codes and the uniqueness of the birth date. If it would be birth second, of course, be more identifying and so on and so forth, right? So we were very close, 87%, which is kind of scary, right? 87% people can be uniquely identified just on those 3. So just removing a few features, right? That's not anonymization. That's not anonymization, right? And often just removing features or torturing the data a little bit is called pseudo-nominalization these days, because people now know that anonymization is not going to happen, right? Well, I'm not going to ask how many of you have heard of the Netflix challenge, because I think this is before your time. This was when I was doing a PhD. Netflix at the time, you know what Netflix is, right? I mean, that's they a bit like they stole the idea from DARPA, I presume. They at one moment posited the Netflix challenge where they gave some data of which users, anonymized, of course, right? I mean, just user 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever, liked which movies. Basically a matrix, right? I mean, users, movies, right? And very sparsely populated table, because most users have not seen all movies, right? I mean, Netflix was not as big in 2006 as it is now, but still, right? I mean, and the goal was to propose an algorithm that could better predict which movies users would watch next, right, than the Netflix algorithm itself. And if you would beat the Netflix algorithm and you were the best team, $1 million. Pretty neat deal, right? I mean, I back then decided to very actively not get involved because, well, 1 million sounds like a lot of money, right? I wouldn't mind having it. Yeah, you're shaking your head. I would like to have 1 million money. I mean, that definitely, US dollars or not, right? And but if you think about it, like how much research effort they basically created, right? I mean, and how little that price is compared to, and what are your chances of beating some team that works? No, sir, thank you. Good. Anyway, fun fact there, by the way. So the algorithm that won was a very weird ensemble method that just used all sorts of things, right? And after the fact, turned out to be completely useless because, well, it only worked very much on the training data and not really in general. I can't share yet the why, because then it would ruin my example here, right? So so Netflix gave $1 million and essentially got nothing for it. This is my smile. 100 million movie ratings with anonymized user IDs. 99% of the users who have rated at least 6 movies, and the moment that you have that you're in Netflix, that this incorporates many people, right? Could be identified one by one by just looking at IMDb reviews. Just like, okay, which people I have also reviewed movies, and that is public data. And at IMDb, people are linked with their actual name. Oopsie. Yeah, well, that's it's a privacy leak, right? I mean, it is also a way to beat the challenge. Because by doing such, right, and so you have a lot of, if let's say Netflix now wants to know what is Jillis Vreker going to watch then, right, and you have the IMDb record, you have me linked already, and you say, okay, what did he rate? I mean, so let's say I watched Harry Potter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? I mean, and 7 is then the question, right? And you could say, okay, well, obviously, but maybe that's the least favorite part of the series. So in IMDb, I rated it, be it very good or bad. Well, then you know that I've watched it, so you can beat the system. And hence the fancy ensemble that Netflix got, that they paid $1 million for. They did a few other stupid things in this challenge, also fun to say. So evaluation is difficult, right? I mean, this was just stupid. Evaluation is also difficult because what they did is that they essentially, in the big metrics of movies and users, right, that they essentially took a shotgun and shot some holes. It's roughly how you can imagine. It's a bit more involved, right? This is how you can imagine it. And that means that for user Jillis Vreker, you would say, okay, Harry Potter 1, 2, 3, he has seen, right? And 5, 6, 7, and well, all the rest, right? Also the Incredible Beast or whatever they're called. I've seen all of them, but did he see movie 4? Right? Well, who knows? Who knows, right? And that's, yeah, that's interpolation, right? That's an interpolation task. And trust me, I mean, I'm a reasonably normal human being, so I do watch series generally in order, right? And that, so yeah. Again, this is how you can cheat. This is called leakage. It's essentially you have, at the moment where you're being asked something, you have information about the future. And of course, in real life, right? I mean, the question for, is he going to watch movie 4? You don't know yet that I watched 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, right? Or whatever the numbers are. In all sorts of other data sets and studies, I mean, that's where data is much more varying and much more also, I mean, privacy infringing. You can also identify a large number of people uniquely. It's also kind of scary. Right? So, yeah, the AOL, that's perhaps the one that I should have started with. I mean, this was a query data set by America Online, let's say a dinosaur type Google. And they released at one moment a data set with all the queries of a whole bunch of users where they replaced the username with a number. They kind of forgot that, well, nobody ever Googles or AOLs for their own name. Oops. And a lot of people were uniquely identifiable. And also there's some very sad stories where you see people really crashing into a depression and all of a sudden starting to Google for suicide help and these types of things, right? I mean, this is privacy nightmare, what happened there, right? I mean, people didn't think what could possibly go wrong. Just one example. Sometimes you can't uniquely pin somebody down, but it still goes wrong in a way you don't want. Here, a simple example is of course not real, right? That, if we know that Gretchen is 55 years old, and I mean, she's a fictional character, right, obviously, in this database, okay, well, where are we, right? I mean, oh, there's only 2 females in this age range, and they either have HIV or something I can't pronounce. Yeah, that I've learned a lot of private information there, right? I mean, I don't know which of the 2 it is, but the only thing I needed here is to know that she's in this database, right? Otherwise, maybe not. But yeah, that's, in many circumstances, you can deduct lots of information you don't want to. We can make things even more scary. Or in a way, right? This is a relatively benign example, right? So perhaps you're not going to be like, oh my God, I'm not scared, but you kind of should be. Suppose that we here have a facial recognition system trained, right? I mean, that's so the left-hand side, I mean, I think that is Tom Cruise. I'm not entirely certain in the top left, but somebody who looks a little bit like him. And well, these are these people, right? And the system is trained to recognize certain people. So it will be more certain for those people than for people who doesn't know, right? Like, yeah, okay, well, is this like Tom Cruise after, I mean, a night in town, right? I mean, that's, or did he get a haircut? I mean, that's, so the more close it is, the more certain the system will be. The only thing that we just have here is that whoops, no, go away. What? know what is up with my laptop in this lecture series. It's really, I mean, at home it functions perfectly fine, but right now I don't have my laser pointer. You don't see my pointer. I do see my pointer, but okay. Whatever. It is just simply a classifier, right? That's all we have. It just says yes, no, right? I mean, and it does what it's supposed to do. What could possibly go wrong? If we now pair it with an image generator, so-called generative adversarial model, doesn't really matter, right? I mean, diffusion model, I mean, something that can generate faces. If we now take these images, as you see from left to right, I mean, we blot out a certain part, right? I mean, is this person in the database or not? Difficult, right? I mean, and we fill it with random noise, and now we start to actually use a diffusion model or something else to fill them in with like a more face, right? And and we let the system doing this many times. Now, the closer the face gets to a face that was in the training data set, the more certain the system is going to be that's going to be a yes. So at one moment, it's going to say yes, and well, the one on the right, I mean, it's not a perfect reconstruction of the face on the left, but it's getting close enough that you can start to see who it is, right? And this is just a simple example from a few years back. These systems become more and more powerful. You could say, okay, you just removed this T thingy, right? I mean, that's, yeah, but we can also play this game completely from scratch. As you know, right, all these facial generators, I mean, they are pretty damn good, right? We can play exactly the same game. So that allows us to extract private information, who was now inside the data set, yes or no, just from simple classifier that says, well, yes or no with a certain certainty. If it does it completely binary, without giving any certainty, then, well, it is more difficult. Still technically possible. Second example is, well, you can read this one. So, privacy is difficult. We have one tool at our disposal that works remarkably well. Differential privacy. And this answers the question, how can we compute, given a data set, a statistical query, which is basically any question you can ask a data set, right? I mean, how many people between this and this range, what is the average, whatever, right? I mean, is this person in the data set? These are all statistical queries. And hence, if you're training a machine learning model, you're essentially firing lots and lots of statistical queries, so it's all equivalent, without leaking, ideally any, but in practice, too much, it's already good enough, too much sensitive information about any individual. How can we now really guarantee that if I collect some data from all of you, right, which might be private, right, I mean, that you might be reluctant to share, how can I guarantee that the model that I train or the query that I do, right, that it really, your privacy is guaranteed? How can we possibly do this? Let's give an example. This is not differential privacy yet, right, but just to illustrate it. We're going to conduct a survey, right, and I'm going to ask you some sensitive question. Like, what is your favorite color, or something like that, right? And that's, or is your favorite color blue? Because it needs to be a binary answer, right? And that's obviously, I mean, have you ever committed tax fraud? No. Does anybody in your family suffer from some very serious disease? That's what we need to think about, right? But I don't like phrasing those out loud, so its favorite color is blue for now. Now, in order to get good results for the survey, I want you to answer truthfully. But, well, how eager are you to share this information, right? And that's especially after all the examples that I just gave you, right? I mean, that's, I don't want to leak too much. Well, let's introduce some randomization. And randomization in such a way that we create plausible deniability. That you can say like, well, it wasn't me. It wasn't me who gave this answer, right? I mean, or I did not participate. I was not even in this data set. Plausible deniability, right? So, and in this particular case, even beyond the, well, but I saw you going into this room, right? So you participated in the survey. So I saw, now I see the answer. So this plausible deniability. What we're going to do is the following. We're going to flip a coin. We're going to flip a coin, and if it lands tails, the deal is you answer truthfully. If it answers head, or if it lands heads, right? Then, well, we flip another coin, or the same coin if you wish, but okay, that doesn't really matter. And if that one lands tails, the answer is yes, and otherwise it's no. So basically, there's a 50-50 chance that you answer correctly or really randomly. And really randomly, right? I mean, I'm not going to ask you to answer randomly because humans are very bad at coming up with random answers and random numbers, I mean, particularly. So let the coin flip do this. Right? Now, what is the fraction of participants that will answer yes truthfully? We can estimate this mean, this population mean, mu, as follows. So this is now, I would really like to have my stupid pointer, which I don't. Stupid thing. Okay, I'll just have to point and wave. 1/4, it is 1 minus mu hat, and we'll figure out what mu hat is. Well, mu hat has already been said. This is the maximum likelihood estimator. So how often did you see it? Plus 3/4 of mu hat. And we can deduce why this is the case. Because how often is the response going to be yes when actually the truth is yes? Well, the probability for that is 3/4. And the response of saying yes if actually the truth is no, it's 1/4. It's relatively easy to figure this out. Now, that means that mu is going to be an unbiased estimator of the non-randomized mean, and the coin flips only increases the variance of this estimator. So basically, the mean is going to be fine. We get something. Now, how can we decrease the variance? By just having more and more people answer this question. So it's 1/4. So the variance is 4 times as large as it otherwise, without the randomization, would be. But that is a hit that I'm willing to take. If this now allows me to run a survey where your answer, you could really say, okay, no, it was the coin that said yes. It was not me. Absolutely fine. But the key concept here is not so much how to do this with coin flips, but the key concept I want to get across here is that we can set up a system where you, as the respondent, can basically say, like, well, it wasn't me, even if it was, right? But there's no way for me to figure out if you were now truthfully or just coin flipping, right? I can only compute an average. That's the only thing I can. Your privacy is protected. And I can do this by introducing some randomization. Same thing holds in differential privacy. Now, there are some downsides of doing the flipping because it only works for, well, basically only for yes-no answers. And we would like to be able to introduce such a scheme for arbitrary statistical queries, even for learning a complete deep neural network, right? In a way that we know, okay, well, it's differentially private, right? So whether you were now part of the study, yes or no, who knows? Who knows, right? And it's impossible to drag you out of it. Differential privacy. It's a bit of an unfortunate abbreviation, so I'm just going to call it differential privacy. A trusted curator is given some data, right? That's the first step. So we need to have some trust in someone, in some party. Now, what we would like is that this curator computes a function, some arbitrary thing, right? Let's say the average height or whatever, right? Think of something. This could also be a complete machine learning model. And now, well, you would like to release the output to the world. But again, without leaking any information. And we can think again of the coin flipping example with the question that is sensitive. Now, effectively, you can see the answers to the survey question, right? That's, in this case, is a binary vector, x. You have n answers, right? Yes or no, right? And these are the truthful answers for now, right? Let's play with that assumption. It doesn't have to be binary in the general case, but for now, right, this makes it easy. Let's suppose we want to compute the mean or whatever. There we are. Now, we can think not just of the actual answers, vector x, right, or curly x as it's noted here, but we can also think of one that is, well, just one, let's say it's very close to x. We flip one value, right? Or we flip very few values. It is very similar, right? That notion. Now, if it is very similar, differs only in one position, then, well, that is essentially equivalent to you having been there in the survey, yes or no, respectively having answered truthfully or not, right? Now, that notion we would like to build upon. It does not matter whether you, or any of you for that matter, of course, were included in the survey, yes or no. You have plausible deniability. And how do we want to now guarantee that? That the answer that we get of the F, the output, right, is essentially the same, regardless of whether you are now in the data set, yes or no. That is the notion we would like to develop. Differential privacy, the differential comes really for there is no difference, or no, let's say, exploitable difference between you or your data being in the data set or not. Could have been anybody else, right? Not me. But, even if my data was, this data point doesn't even exist. So effectively what we would like to do is some measure of the difference between the f of x and the f of x prime. That needs to be close for x and x primes that are close. That's what we would like to have. And now what we're going to do, and this is the key insight of differential privacy, I'm just going to contemplate the true x data, right? And I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of noise on top of this data, such that it's randomized. And I'm going to do it in such a way that this holds. So I want data that is, in a way, as close as possible to the true data, but at the same time guarantees that for any f, any query that we let loose on this data, the answers are going to be epsilon similar. That is the notion. That, well, allows me to guarantee that, well, for any of you that are included in the data, you're good, right? But also anything else that we would like to do with the data or with the model, whatever is released, because it's just random. Formally, what we're going to have here, and I'm going to speed a little bit through these slides because I also like to discuss the fairness topic a bit later. So, formally, we have an input and output space, data and whatever the function predicts, right? And we need to have a relationship that something is epsilon close. We call this the symmetric neighboring relationship, so the almost equal sign or something like that. We also want to have a privacy parameter. So essentially, how difficult, or how far apart are these results now? Because you could say, well, I want to have absolute protection, right? And that's, absolute protection is easy because rather than the actual data, I throw it away and I just generate a random data set and I release that, right? And that's which not necessarily one factor. You can imagine that the data is one matrix, right? I throw away the entire matrix. I just generate a random matrix. Here's your data, right? Privacy of everybody is protected. But obviously, yeah, so that has sort of the epsilon is very large, right? In that sense. But of course, on this completely random data, yeah, any function that I compute on the random data is most likely going to give a very different answer than the true data. So there we have what we call a bit of tension between the utility. You want to have as good as possible answers of function f, right? And learn the same models. And at the same time, you want to have a high privacy. So privacy and utility sort of bite each other a little bit. And hence it's a parameter. And well, yeah, good luck choosing it. So how is it now defined? The probability of the answers, so basically the randomization is the amount of noise that I sprinkle on top of the data. Which values do I flip, right? And you can think of this in the sense of, so in continuous value data, you could think of it that for every attribute, we sample some value from some zero mean Gaussian. And the variance of this Gaussian, that determines, let's say, how private that attribute becomes, right? If I have a very zero mean Gaussian with a very small variance, that means that the value I read in that column is going to be very close to the true one, right? The higher the variance, I mean, the more random it's going to be. And we do this for every column independently. For binary data, well, you can do similar tricks, right? And you can have initially a coin flip, just a Bernoulli with some probability of, like, if it lands heads, respectively tails, we keep the original value or we're going to replace it. And for the replacement, you could even then play the game just like in the randomization game we played before. We then flip another coin to determine what is the value going to be. And then all of a sudden we're sprinkling some noise. Now, I can go further into the theory, but I rather want you to also know immediately what are now the tricky parts of differential privacy, because the theory and the intuition is very nice, right? The theory is beautiful, but my favorite question, what could possibly go wrong? So let me now pose it to you. Suppose that we now, let's think of the continuous valued case, or actually think of your favorite data type, right? And I sprinkle per column some noise, right? And I do this for all the columns because I want to keep everything private. What could possibly go wrong? I'm adding a noise in this example independently per column, right? Per attribute, per feature. Are each of the columns independent? Probably not. Most applications, they're not. And that means if I now have a very strong correlation in the true data, but I now start to add independent noise, I can create sort of weird data points. Weird data points that would never happen in real life, or are very unlikely to happen in real life. They can have a disparate effect on the function that I would learn, or basically the models I can possibly learn, the patterns I can extract, the structure that is still present in the randomized data versus the true data. So there could be really a one-to-one correlation between two attributes in the true data, but all of a sudden, if we now add the noise in an unlucky way, all of a sudden this correlation can be, well, hidden, respectively destroyed. It can happen, and in many cases it will happen. It's okay, but wait a second, if it really destroys a linear relationship, then something is wrong. Yes, but think of medical data. Let's say rare diseases, right? I mean, always go to an extreme to see where things go wrong, right? Scale it up, make it difficult, right? This is always a very good exercise. Now, suppose that you have some rare disease, so you have very little data. You have lots of data for normal people, right, if such a thing exists, and you have very few cases of people with that particular disease, like a ratio of 1 to 10,000, 1 to 100,000, something like this. Yeah, you kind of would be screwed over if you now add the wrong noise, coincidentally, to exactly those data points. All of a sudden, there's nothing learnable on this data set anymore. Oops, that's a bit of a problem. You say, okay, well, we should make the privacy a bit less privacy, right? I mean, that's. But before you know it, then you sprinkle so little noise that, yeah, well, everybody is uniquely identifiable. So it is not just a matter of sprinkling an amount of noise, it's also the type of noise that you add to the data. Now, this adding of noise to the data is really just the basic building block, the concept that I want to get across. Because rather than adding noise to the data, we can also add noise while learning. For example, you can learn a differentially private neural network by sprinkling noise on the weights of your neural network. When you're doing your stochastic gradient descent, you're doing your backpropagation of your errors, you adjust your values. You know what? Let's just add a tiny little bit of noise, or perhaps a lot of noise. And if you do this the right way, then your network, if you learn, right, it is undeterminable under this function here whether you were or weren't part of the original training data set. And then you have a model that can be released. So, but the notion is really add noise at the right level. Good. Let's see. Yeah, this is essentially what we already discussed in that. So effectively, we have two data sets, blue and yellow in this particular case, where the one is epsilon close to the other. You could also see this as the distribution of y for that data set is then ever so slightly different. And well, you want to now add noise such that those distributions are as close as possible, but at the same time, you still have this privacy guarantee. Good. I'm going to ask you actually, do you want me to discuss differential privacy in more detail? Or shall we, after the break, we're going to take a break regardless, right? Shall I, after the break, focus on a different topic, fairness? Who's in favor of differential privacy? One. Who's in favor of fairness? I'm sorry. If I would be a dictator, I would, it's super interesting, but, but you're in luck. There are plenty of courses on offer, seminars, right, by colleagues of mine at CISPA who study this in full detail. But, so I can specifically point you to Adam Djicic, Franziska Bernisch, Yang Zhang, and Mario Fritz. All four work on privacy aspects of machine learning. Right? They're not the only ones, but they offer fantastic seminars, courses, and whatnot. Good. Then let's have a break. Let's reconvene at, well, is 5 minutes okay for a break? Yeah? Okay, 5 minutes, and then I continue with fairness. Thanks. Okay, I think 5 minutes are up, right? Yeah, I see you nodding. You've been keeping the time. Very good. Meanwhile, you might have noticed that the slides, we're not in 2024 anymore. All of a sudden, we went from 16:9 to 4:3. So looking at the next few slides, and I was thinking, well, I have a better slide deck for this, a prettier slide deck from another course that I taught a few years ago. And well, that one I only have in 4:3, and the conversion of a few of the old slides into the new slides into old format was much easier than the other way around. So I will update the slides or perhaps upload the other slide deck in addition. The content, what I'm going to cover is more or less the same, like epsilon. It's differentially private. Biased algorithms wreak havoc societally. I already gave a few examples, right? In the hiring thing, for example. But there's plenty of like remarkably crazy things going on. Xing, so job board, right? I mean that's ranks, well, male versus female candidates differently if they are equally qualified. This is something that, well, I hope that all of us in the room think, okay, this is not okay. In a way, worse, ProPublica. This is a famous study back in, I think, 2018, at the top of my head. They did a study of the COMPASS system. COMPASS is a machine learning system that predicts the recidive cases. So basically, you're in prison, right? I mean, that's how likely are you going to predict a crime when we release you on probation, right? And that turns out that this, well, as you can read, the false positive rate for white people, white-skinned people, way higher than for blacks. Basically, if you're black, just let's keep you in prison, right? I mean, that's, you're white, you're holding a bloody knife, but okay, please go out again, right? I mean, that's, but clean the knife on the way out. I mean, that's, perhaps that is a bit exaggerated, but it's ridiculous, right? I mean, that's, why would you even consider using a machine learning system without very carefully thinking what could possibly go wrong? Facial recognition. Depending on skin color, it's going to recognize you much worse or much better. Whether you're male or female, it's ridiculous. But, I'm not going to go through all of them, but there's a ton of applications where things go horribly wrong because people didn't think. They didn't think, like, should we develop an algorithm at all? They didn't think, okay, what are the biases in my data, right? That may be then further developed. I mean, that's the feedback loop that I spoke about, and so on and so forth, right? What causes such biases? Why are, well, it's not just people being stupid, but it's also like, well, what could possibly go wrong? Where do these biases come from? The training data may be tainted. It may be biased itself. We already spoke about this, right? I mean, that's that Amazon, I mean, if they hired for a number of years extremely many people from one particular part of the world, and then you train them, yeah, okay, well, what is the poor machine learning model to do, right? I mean, it is supposed to, well, to classify. It's supposed to separate groups, right? You can't say like, okay, now you're racist. Yeah, I was told to be racist. That's, yeah, skewed samples. For example, I mean, climate change is a very good a good example. If you have observations of a system that is developing, then, and you have many samples from the past where things were still all good and fine, and you have few samples from the new state, then yeah, you're not going to be able to learn the new state that well, right? This is also what you saw when COVID hit the scene, that all, let's say, all companies who were using machine learning or data science-based mechanisms to predict, let's say, demand, or I mean, also suggesting things, I mean, that they went completely haywire. I mean, also the stock market, I mean, crashed not just because the world came to a standstill, but because we have never been in such a situation. We didn't have data points to train the machine learning systems, and it was like, okay, well, this is just a weird day. Let's continue like the day before. Perhaps not, right? Perhaps not. Proxies. This is what I already explained in the hiring case. So if you remove okay, you know what, we're going to remove the feature nationality, right? Now everything is going to be fine. No, because then, well, university names, right? And that's, okay, you could also, the same thing with, if you remove gender or biological sex. Well, okay, if you're now let's say the chairperson on your CV of the women's chess club, yeah, okay, then all of a sudden there you are again, right? I mean that's there are so many subtle signals in written text, also in all sorts of other data, right? That if you don't know about them, you can't protect, right? You can't protect that things go haywire. Yeah, the others. I mean, I'm in the interest of time, I'm not going to list everything. But, this is the example I already gave. This is another example. I'm just going to skip over this. Software is not free of human influence. It's what we already see, and algorithms reinforce human prejudices. But, the question is what kind of, okay, and actually here I can skip a few slides because now we're, can we use technology, can we use machine learning to make the world a better place? Well, fairness. Under what conditions? I mean, is it with regard to what the data supports? So fairness with regard to the historical data we have. Can we protect the withholding protected feature? We already know that is a bad idea. We could have we could decide fair rules. I mean, that's thou shalt not discriminate against gender, this or that, right? I mean, that's how can we now enforce these types of fairness inside an algorithm? How can we guarantee that an algorithm won't break the rules that we set? Laws. Well, come on. Yes. So I'm going to work with this example. I have a fictitious AI startup. Conscious blockchain, much deep, total AI. I mean, we're still looking for the exact right name, right? But this is the sketch for our user interface. I mean, that's, and I'm hiring software engineers, right? Because I'm too lazy to actually program, and my PhD students are busy doing research. We want to run a hiring ad. It's going to be my running example. Now let's set things up such that we have a bit of notation that is hopefully easy to understand and reasonably easy to follow, right? And mind you, these are slides from an advanced lecture. It's like, okay, what the hell is happening here? Then, okay, yeah, sorry, my bad. We have some features of an individual, browsing history, whatnot, right? I mean, that's because we want to put ads on the web. We have some sensitive attribute because, well, we are a conscious blockchain company, so we don't want to discriminate against gender. Now, for each person, we want to determine, do we want to show the ad, yes or no? And of course, we would like to show those ads to those people that are most likely to apply for our super cool job, right? What we exactly want to predict is sort of the target variable. Is somebody a software engineer or being trained for one, right? That's what you would like to do. So effectively, what we have a probability distribution. Where did E come from? Of the target, it should be Y. Given that, so we want to, so I'm going to write this as P subscript A for some E. Let's take Y. I mean, that I will also do something else, I guess. And there we have P should be the same, or should be, is defined as what is the probability of somebody being a software engineer, right, for a specific protected class, right? I mean, for gender A, gender B, or whatnot, right? I mean, it's just a shorthand that allows me to write it a bit more easily. I'm going to have a score function. It's going to be a random variable, right? I mean, that's, so there's some randomization. We're going to have this. It's basically, so a big R is the value that small r gives as a function over x and a. This is basically, let's say, the probability of x being a software engineer. This is how you can interpret it, right? It doesn't have to be a probability. It could be just your logistic regression, whatever we trained, right? Doesn't really matter. But we can threshold it such that if the value is above a certain value, it's going to be 1, respectively 0, and so on and so forth, right? But, now, the Bayes optimal classifier, you know how this is, right, is the one where on expectation, so the function R should learn what is now the true probability on expectation of somebody being a software engineer with the right values. This is our basic formulation. Now, we're going to be discussing 3 different types of fairness. Those are also a bit like the 3 types of fairness that we can really write down neatly. Independence, separation, and sufficiency. Let's start with the first one, independence. There shan't be any difference between the groups. We require C and A to be independent. So the classification should be independent of the biological gender, or the biological sex. Biological gender is a bit of a weird word. We write it as like that, right? So we haven't seen this notation, I think, but C and then this sort of upside down weird T means independent, right? If I tell you the value of C, you can't predict the value of A any better than without me having told you C, right? And vice versa. So that means that for all groups of A, for all genders, whatever, right? And that's and B. And for all individual values C, we want these probabilities to be the same, right? The probability of getting a 1 as an output should be the same for the men and for the women, or whatever the genders are. This is also known as statistical parity. Statistically, these 2 groups are the same. There is no difference, right? This is very much a utopian version of fairness, you could say. It's what you would like to have, but where we are not yet at. And also, which in many cases is utopian in the sense that it's impossible to reach for whatever reasons. We can relax the equality, the strict equality that we had above, by the difference, if you put them on top of each other, should not be, or should be larger than 1 over epsilon. So for a small epsilon, they should be very close to each other. But if the one probability is a bit higher than the other, then it's kind of fine, right? And now by choosing epsilon smaller or larger, we can be a bit more relaxed, right? Because one problem that you can probably already spot is that, well, if you look at the lecture, so I'm not sure how many of you are taking software engineering, I mean, that's the core lecture, or planning to, but in general, as software engineers, there is a bit of a gender imbalance. So should we now show the ad to equally many women and equally many men? Yeah, well, if there are software engineers, yes, but this does not take into account whether somebody is a software engineer, yes or no. This just says equally often a yes, respectively a no, for the men and for the women, or for group A and for group B, approximately. So how can we achieve this type of independence? There's many ways how you can fix this. In that, one way to do it is to take the data and change the labels, the true labels Y to Y prime, such that they are independent with regard to A. How do we measure if something is independent? I don't have the time right now to go into independence measures and the likes, but effectively how you can think about it, if you now use the methods that you know to train a classifier or a regressor, right? This we could also extend to continuous values. And with the techniques that you know, basically you can't reduce the error. Because if you can't reduce the error, there is no dependence that is being exploited, right? I mean, that is essentially how you can think of it. Perhaps you've heard of Pearson correlation coefficient. That's also what you can do. You can think of entropy. There's a number of ways that you do know, but let's not get too deep into this. You can also leave the data as it is and not screw it over too much, because if you screw over the data, then okay, what is still to be learned, right? And that maybe we flipped the wrong value and that destroys this rare disease subgroup. We can also take the machine learning model and ensure that every decision that it takes while learning maintains the fairness. For example, a good friend of mine, Toon Kalders, was one of the first to propose a fair decision tree algorithm back in 2009. This was really one of the very first algorithms that took into account fairness. Well, 2009 is, well, some years ago, 15 years ago, but it is a bit crazy that it took till 2009 before people started to think like, hey, wait a second, perhaps you want algorithms that don't discriminate. And this paper was for a long time completely ignored, and only, I think 8 years ago, this started to be picked up again, this topic. So, a bit crazy. We can also pre-process the input features to be fair. It's a bit similar, yet also different from, well, the post-processing we've been fiddling with the data. What we can do, we can learn a fair representation. We have the input data, X and A, right? And what we're now going to learn is a representation, Z. And you can think of this pretty much like we had a neural network, right? You throw some data in, and then you have some layers of neural network, and then the activations of the neurons at some layer, right? That is going to be our representation. And now what we're going to do is we want to make sure that this representation, these values of these neurons, are independent of A. Let me write it like this. So we want to maximize the, or let's start with the minimize, the min I of A and Z. I stands for the amount of information. How well can we reconstruct A given Z and vice versa? How much information is shared? That we want to minimize. While we want to maximize the amount of information between X and Z. Minimax problem, right? Always a bit tricky, but you can essentially train a neural network to have now as sort of an output layer from which you can maximally well predict X, and you basically slap it around if you can predict A from it. That's what you can train. So you effectively have a neural network. After this layer, you have one layer that starts to predict X, the other layer starts to predict A, and well, the one, it gets a cookie, otherwise, I mean, well, it gets, well, let's say this one, it gets a carrot, this gets a stick. You don't know yet how to put this together technically, right? But I hope that the general ideas are clear enough here. Now, problem is, like I already said, there is many more male software engineers than female ones. So this utopian type of measure is going to lead to, well, essentially unfair treatment. We're going to be fair in the sense that, well, the number of ads we show to the men, respectively women, that's fair. But now we're becoming unfair in a way, because if there simply are more software engineers of the one or the other class, well, they now get a lower chance than strictly what you would want to have to see an ad. So perhaps you're now fair on gender, but you're not fair on, well, the software engineerness. And obviously, right, software engineerness, you can now also replace with, I don't know, I mean, where you're from in the world, right? I mean, that's, do you have a higher or a lower income, and so on and so forth, right? I mean, that's software engineerness is just an example here, right? Just as the gender is. But, so effectively, by using this notion of independence for fairness, you may rule out the perfect classifier. The perfect classifier would here just say, okay, well, if somebody is a software engineer, we're going to say yes. That is not allowed anymore, because that's dependent, it's not independent. Simply because, well, the populations are not from the same distribution in terms of software engineeringness. It permits laziness. You can trade false negatives for false positives. Being a little bit less good in predicting the one class is not really a big problem. You can just, one error here or one error there doesn't really matter. Which means that that class for which you have the fewer positive samples, in this case, the female software engineers, not predicting those well is essentially as bad as, well, not predicting a male software engineer to be a software engineer, right? So, and of course, yeah, essentially you're going to get a classifier that is going to go completely in the wrong direction. This is the main thing. It mixes a desirable long-term goal with an algorithmic constraint. And hence, technology is not the solution. It sounds great, independence, statistical parity, but if you deploy this, as the company owner, I would be unhappy because I would spend a lot of money showing ads to people who do not want to see the ads, who are never going to click my ads, right? And I'm missing out on those people who want to see my ads, and, well, everybody's unhappy. Second type of criterion. Thou shan't decide differently given the target. What does that mean? We changed the game slightly. We now want the function R, or the output of the function R, right? So basically the probability of somebody to be a software engineer, right? And that's and the protected attribute, those should be independent, conditioned on the fact whether they truly are a software engineer. So if somebody is truly a software engineer, right? Well, then I want a high value of R, and if they're not, well, then low is good, right? And I don't want to be, well, let's say, ridiculously super over fair with regard to gender. I still want to be realistic in terms of what the output variable is, which means if the output variable is not fairly distributed, then this is perhaps the most fair classifier we can obtain. Let's go for this, right? Sounds a bit more realistic, perhaps. Formally, for all groups A and B, and for all values R and Y, we want to make sure that these probabilities are the same. So the probability of getting an output should be the same between the two groups, given the same label. Formally, we write it like, well, like we have there, but and graphically, we put it like this. So you don't know graphical notation yet, that's because probability theory is a bit beyond what we do in EML. But effectively, what we have here in this diagram is super easy to read. A and Y, they share an edge, right? And it means that there is a statistical dependence between the two. This is fine, right? There's also an edge between Y and R. Statistical dependence is fine. And in fact, you want to have a dependence between Y and R, because if there's no dependence, if there's no edge between Y and R, then you're not predicting the actual label, right? But what is important, there is no edge from A to R. The protected attribute, right, and the actual value that you spit out, that should be independent, given the dependence on Y, right? So no shared information that cannot already be explained by the label. Now, what is nice about this? It does allow for optimality. The classifier that says, yes, software engineer, if it's a software engineer, is now allowed. So this is much better than the previous one. All good. Instead of rewarding, it penalizes laziness. It's not going to say there are so few female software engineers, fuck it, I'm just not going to say any yes there, right? I mean, that's whether I now predict, let's say, for the wrong one, whether she is a software engineer or not, who cares, right? This one penalizes that, because within a group, so it's basically, it's tailored towards being a software engineer, yes or no. Cool. How can we achieve this? Well, we can achieve it by post-processing. And by post-processing, what we're going to do is the following. So we need to look at the ROC curve. ROC curve we saw earlier in EML. Slightly uglier figure back then. This is the prettier one, because certain lectures I spent even more time on the figures, or I just didn't get to cleaning up the one in EML yet. What we have here is the false positive rate and the true positive rate for different thresholds on R. Remember, right? R is sort of the probability or whatever we try to learn for somebody being a software engineer. And I can set a threshold. Okay, well, if it's above 0.99, then I say it's a software engineer, and otherwise no, right? I mean, that's and I can slide this probability. And for each of these thresholds, I essentially have a new classifier. New, where obviously a very small change is going to give me almost the same classifier, perhaps even the same in practice, right? But you understand what I mean. Each of those dots correspond to one such a classifier. So here I was sufficiently lazy that I only drew 6, right? But eventually we kind of have infinitely many dots here. Now, which of those dots are we interested in? We're only interested in those that achieve a very good true positive rate and a low false positive rate. So what we say is that the ones on the convex hull towards the top left corner, those dominate the ones below. So we're only interested in the ones that are left right now. Now, like I said, in theory, we have infinitely many of those points, right? So we have a nice clean curve. Okay, good. This is for, actually, let's take a sip. This is for the one class. We can define this. We can also do this for the other class. Do the same thing. Well, we tune it into the one and the other direction. We have another curve. Now, this is for group A and group B, right? So classes mean for the groups. So basically for the men, for the women, whatever, right? I mean, that's for the hair colors. And perhaps for hair color, the blue hair colors mean it's easier to predict or not. Now, we are only interested in classifiers above this diagonal. Anything below the diagonal is just stupid, right? The diagonal is a coin flip, right? I mean, if you can't beat a coin flip, what are you even doing? So we're only interested in classifiers above the dashed line. And now the question is, which points within the space here would we actually like to have? Which ones are fair, or the opposite, which ones would be unfair? So we have essentially 4 quadrants, right? We have within blue and green. We have within green but not blue, we have blue and not green, and we have outside. Which of those quadrants would you say is the fair one? Or which ones which ones are not fair? Any intuition yet? What we want is a classifier that has no specific bias for the one or the other group, right? That's what we want. We don't want to have something that is just better at predicting which female candidate has, expertise in software engineering versus the men, right? That's you don't want this. It needs to. Oh, yep. Please go. The intersection. Very good. You only give correct answers. It's almost boring. Thank you. I like boring. No, indeed, the intersection. This is what we want, because there, any dot under this curve, we can achieve for both the group A and group B. If I would take a dot in the, let's say, the green area but not blue area to the left, right, that means that I have a classifier that can achieve this true positive rate at such a low false positive rate for group A but not for B. This means I would be treating group B worse than group A. That we don't want. So rather than taking the best classifier per group, we take the best classifier per group that we can match with an equally good, respectively bad classifier for the other group. Anything in the intersection goes. So this means if we now go back to the dots that define these curves, originally we had, these were the dark ones, right? The ones that we were interested in. Why would we go for any worse classifier? Right now, our opinion changed. We're not interested in the leftmost dark green dot anymore because we can't match it with an equally good blue dot. Same thing with the two blue dots at the top. So those have to go. They become red and they're gone. And then all of a sudden, the other combinations or the other classifiers for different thresholds that we first threw away by just maximizing accuracy, which we were doing in the previous live, all of a sudden, those are the ones that actually become interesting. Those are the ones that we want to be able to achieve. Okay. Let me see. So I'm going to skip how to do this exactly because super interesting, but meh. Not so important right now because you're not going to implement this. I'd rather have that you know the third criterion and, well, the what could possibly go wrong. Those are the two things I still want to discuss, and then I wrap up. Third criterion, sufficiency. I don't have a nice preachy way to put it. That's a random variable R just doesn't work. We call R sufficient for A if the following graphical notation holds. With A, we can predict to a certain extent R and vice versa. With R, we can predict Y and vice versa. But with Y, we don't know anything more about A than R already gave us. Right? So Y and A are independent given R. So the score R is enough to determine what is now in this case the protected attribute, the gender, right? And that's meaning that the label and the gender become independent. Why would we need this? Why? For the purpose of predicting Y, well, we don't need to see A. We just need R. R is sufficient. We don't have to care anymore what somebody's gender is. That's also nice, right? The score is sufficient. No worries anymore. So if your credit score is sufficient to predict whether you should get a loan, right? Then whether you're a student or not, whether you're male, female, blue hair, green hair, purple hair, doesn't matter, right? And that would be nice, right? No. Sufficiency is easily attained by Bayes optimal score, such that the one that we saw at the beginning, right? And that's the Bayes optimal classifier does this. Another reason why we like the Bayes optimal classifier so much, and another reason why we hate that we can't just get our hands on it. Now, how do you achieve sufficiency? Quite technical. In that, we want to make sure that every group gets an honest probability. In that, in the sense that score R should correspond to the probability of somebody being a software engineer, given that we give it that score R. So if I give a very high score, right, R, for actually the probability for that high score, someone being a software engineer is very low, that is bad, right? So then I should give a lower score R. How low? Well, to exactly the point, what is now the probability of seeing somebody being a software engineer if I set the threshold at a particular R? can achieve this through some rescaling. Doesn't really matter. Main point here is that we have now 3 notions of fairness, all of which, when I first told them to you, probably said like, yeah, this makes sense, right? I mean, that's and we saw some problems with the previous one, so they make sense, right? I mean, that's to propose. How you achieve them exactly, this is sort of the bonus lecture in EML anyway, so it doesn't really matter at this stage. Okay, we have 3 notions of fairness, each of which have certain ups and downs. Because this calibration you can also basically do against people. This is what went wrong in this COMPASS study with this, the probation predictor, right? The problem is, with fairness, you can't catch them all. It's impossible. We've seen 3 scores, each with their own benefits, and every 2 of them are mutually exclusive. You can't have the one and the other of any pair, which is kind of shit. Let's quickly look at why this is the case. It's quite intuitive, right? In that, so I'm going to, it's going to be written very formally, but I mean the explanation behind it, you will probably see it. So independence and sufficiency. Now, if A and Y are dependent, which we write like this, then either independence holds, which is what we want, or sufficiently holds, which is what we want, but we kind of want both, but not both. Okay, why? If A and Y are dependent, and A and Y are independent given R, definition of sufficiency, then automatically A and R are dependent. If you draw this graphically, basically, if you draw the one set of edges, you can't draw the other one anymore because that makes it, that crashes against the definition of independence. Let's look at independence versus separation. If A and Y are dependent, not independent, and R and Y are dependent, then either the one or the other holds. Similarly, R and A are independent, and R and A are independent given Y. Well, that means that Y doesn't add any additional information, right? And that means that either A and Y are independent, Y doesn't add anything, right? I mean, or R and Y are independent. And remember that we had this chain, right, where we need to at least have some of these edges. Otherwise, I mean, separation doesn't hold, right? That's so. Now, between the last 2, I'm just going to wave it for you. I mean, it's a textbook fact. I mean, that in the definitions, I mean, it just cannot hold. That's walking through its proof. I mean, I don't think it's that insightful. Any pair of these notions of fairness is not possible. So we have to stick to one. And we already saw that for the first one, and for the second and the third, I mean, I didn't go into details where they break, but trust me, they break in quite spectacular ways as well. So, technology alone is not the solution. QED. So yeah, fairness is a bit of an open issue. Let me quickly skip to, oops, my other slides again. Where are we? Now let's also share it here. So yeah, equality of opportunity, that we haven't seen it. But there's many more of these definitions, but you can sort of group them together in the 3 that you've seen. They're all very, very related. And that they're provably incompatible, we've seen. Visualizing, yeah. So here in the slides that I was planning to show you, there's again a nice online thing where you can play with a number of these notions and with these calibrations and sort of make these things break, right? So it just becomes visual where things go wrong. I thought there was now going to be a slide where we show the way out, but I now see another slide coming up, which I also want to show. What is the way out? Or what is the realization that came about in around 2018, give or take? We have to consider fairness through a causal lens. So far, all the machine learning you've seen is all based on pure statistics, plain statistics, and just associations. There is no causality, truly. The moment that you learn a classifier and it picks up features A, B, C and it can predict it really well, does that mean that features A, B, C cause the output? No, absolutely not. You can't say that. It can be completely spurious, right? We've seen that already in learning the optimal or learning a good logistic regressor, for example. You either take this set of features or that set of features, and you can't say anything about causality. If you have a linear regressor, you could say, okay, well, certain things have a very high coefficient. Oh, that must be important. No, it could be completely anti-causal, can be completely spurious. However, if we now, so there exists a whole line of research on how can we extract causal dependencies from data, under which conditions can we reason? And there we have the notion of counterfactual reasoning. And this is the type of reasoning that is, for example, that here, this gentleman here in the front, I'm not going to give you 1 million. I'm sorry, right? I mean, that's, you asked me for it, right, before the lecture. I'm not going to give you, right? I mean, that's, well, and you're smiling right now, but internally he's crying, right? I mean, as you can imagine, because everybody wants 1 million. I didn't say what million, right? 1 million homeworks, or I don't know. That, perhaps that's why he's smiling. But he's wearing like headphones around his neck. Maybe I'm just discriminating against people with headphones around their neck. Could be, right? I mean, that's, so now a counterfactual notion of fairness is that would my treatment of you, would it have been different had you not worn your headphones around your neck? Would you have hidden, would have given you then the 1 million thingies? Well, if so, that's not very fair of me, is it? Right? Maybe, well, suppose that it's €1,000,000, right? And say, okay, well, the chances of you paying this back to me within a certain amount of time is just too low, right? And that's because of these and these criteria. And these criteria that I make a decision on, that should be verifiably, if those were to change, right? If you would, let's say, you have a super well-paying job, right? I mean, that's, okay, well, then why didn't I give you that, right? But, so we can now reason about the classifier, my decision, right? What would I have done in a different world? If you would have had shorter hair, blue hair, different gender, whatever, right? The whole magic toolbox, right? That's, but note that we're now doing something weird. We're reasoning about the world that doesn't exist because you're wearing headphones around your neck. But we humans can quite easily reason about, okay, well, yeah, if I would now have given you loan without the headphones, okay, then that is apparently very important. Why, right? I mean, that's, and the headphones, of course, we can replace with skin color, gender, whatever, right? I mean, that's, but I don't want to. Right? A headphoneist, I don't mind being called, but I don't want to be. Reasoning about a world that we haven't observed, counterfactual, strongly rooted in causal research, that allows us to define formal notions of fairness and also algorithms that are counterfactually fair, where that links very closely to what we also do in the legal system, right? And that's, if you accidentally, let's say, well, you're driving on the highway, right? I mean, that's, let's say the difference. I mean, it's a whole example. I apologize. You're driving your car, right? I mean, that's, you're driving in a pedestrian zone, right? And that's versus you're driving on the highway, right? I mean, that's, and a kid all of a sudden runs onto the highway, right? I mean, that's, I'm going to leave it in the middle if the kid survives, right? I mean, that's, let's hope so, right? I mean, that's, but you accidentally hit the kid. In the one case, this is, well, much more, let's say, due to you are really to blame than in the other, right? In the pedestrian zone, dude or girl, right? Whatever. It's like be careful, right? Here be kids. On the highway, expecting a kid to run onto the, yeah, well, and let's assume that you were not speeding like you're driving the speed limit. The situation where you can reason about, well, if this would have been at this situation or that situation, and here you're to blame and there you're not. So we can formalize this in a very similar to the legal system. Good. So there is a way out for fairness, and amongst others, Isabel Valera, professor of machine learning here, is working a lot on both fairness and counterfactual fairness. So in a way, I'm now pitching, and I'm sort of pitching her research, right? Good. Before I wrap up, I have one example further to show, because there is a lot more wrong with machine learning. machine learning is brittle as fuck, excuse my French. Adversarial examples. I mean, it's very easy to trick. This particular case, well, on the left-hand side, I mean, it's a very traditional example by now, 10 years old. Nice little cute panda. We add some noise that we carefully choose, and all of a sudden, a gibbon. And we could easily make this, well, if this is a piggy, then it predicts airplane, right? Imperceptible. What effectively is happening behind the scenes is that the machine learning model did not learn how to recognize panda or piggy or airplane, right? It just learned on a very long vector of RGB values, right? And it learned to somehow separate, okay, if there are some values here, okay, then I say panda and there I say gibbon, right? So effectively there is, in some very high dimensional space, some decision plane, right? Pandas here, gibbons there. By adding a little bit of noise, we can take a panda picture, right? That's cute little panda, and imperceptibly move it right across the decision border. And all of a sudden it's a gibbon. You say, okay, fuck it. I mean, panda is cute, gibbon is cute, right? Who cares? But, well, you kind of do care if you now print out a sticker and put it on a stop sign, and all of a sudden it's a right-of-way sign. And this actually happens. And you can trick self-driving cars with that. This is kind of scary, right? And that you can trick all sorts of things in that way. Other way around, this is more of a funny example, right? I mean, depending on which glasses you print, you're being classified. So the top is the input picture, but what it now says that it is, the closest person in the database is the one at the bottom. Yeah, that's funny, right? I mean, that is funny. But machine learning is incredibly brittle. And I'm not trying to say that everything we taught you in EML was stupid, right? You need to know these basics, but you also need to know that you're wielding a very sharp stick, right? And it's very easy to stab yourself in the leg or anything else, right? Or other people. That's be careful how you wield it. This, for me, is again an example of that machine learning doesn't really see the world in causal, semantically meaningful terms, just in pixels, just in associations, right? It doesn't see the panda for what it is, it's just pixels. It doesn't see the stop sign with, okay, some stickers on top of it, right? It's how you and I see it, but just pixels. And these pixels are then chosen such that, well, an arbitrary response can be triggered. Good. I'm not going to read it all. I think I made it clear enough that machine learning is pretty cool, but once you start to deploy it in the real world, a lot of concerns above, oh my God, accuracy is higher than 0.99, right? It's many, many more. And often you rather have a system that is 70% accurate, but, well, doesn't screw up in other ways that are perhaps even worse. Think of, does it even make sense to solve things with a data-driven algorithm? Think of what would be the effects downstream, right? It's a little bit related to, I think, the physicists who were working on the Manhattan Project back in the Second World War. Like, we're just doing physics, right? Nuclear fission, we can build a bomb. Yeah, they built a bomb that stopped the war, right? But during the Cold War, I mean, our world could have been blown up many, many times, right? And that's, what's the name? The guy of the movie. Oppenheimer, exactly. I mean, that's the reason why he went in this depression, is that after they developed the bomb, then he realized, like, well, okay, this was a nice scientific achievement, but fuck, what have we unleashed, right? In a way, what we're unleashing with machine learning is, I think, well, perhaps not physically as destructive as an atomic bomb, but societally, I mean, it has all the makings of it, right? All the makings. So be very careful in how you develop machine learning systems, and take into account that, well, on the receiving end, there's actual humans. It could be yourself. Good. On that, I mean, it's not a bit downbeat. I mean, I wanted to actually end with something upbeat. I mean, that's I don't even have a picture of a panda up next. I mean, that. Good. I apologize for going over time once again. I hope that you can forgive me. I wish you all the best with the exam, and looking forward to seeing you there, and looking forward to, well, grading many of your exams so positively that you pass, right? But that is, help me help you, right? I mean, that's study well, do well, and then all that can come to fruition. It was a pleasure lecturing for you, and see you around. Bye-bye.